Welcome back to Fast Politics. Jeet,
Good to be on the program.
you are our Canadian bureau chief here at
That's right.
Fast
Yes.
Politics. And as Canadian bureau chief, you are uniquely situated to speak to us about the Canadian elections, which Donald Trump played a massive, massive role in.
Yeah, including on election day where he had this tweet where he was suggesting that Canadians vote for him, and which just seemed a little bit odd because he was not on the ballot anywhere in Canada. Like metaphorically, I think it's absolutely true that Trump had a massive influence. Now, I have to say, like, Canada, we're the tenth of the size of the U.S. in terms of population. And the U.S. is always a big role. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who's the father of Justin Trudeau and was a prime minister in the 60s, when he met Richard Nixon, he said, well, for Canadians, living next to the United States is like living next to an elephant. However benign the elephant is, if it starts twitching and grunting, we notice. In this case, like imagine living next to an elephant, but it's actually on crack and it's rampaging through the jungle. That kind of has an impact. So Trump
um,
was the rampaging elephant of this election.
yeah, people have talked about that Canadians feel like they're living over a crack house. That's what I've heard,
Yeah,
right?
that's also
That's
the metaphor. Yeah. In
yeah.
any case,
So explain to us just the fundamentals of how Canadian elections work. You guys have prime ministers, they are elected for term. It's more of a coalition government. Explain.
yeah. No, I mean it's a parliamentary system. So what it basically means is that it's like the House of Representatives. Like you have like all these districts, and whichever party has the most number of seats. In American terms, it would be as if like previously Nancy Pelosi had been prime minister, and then Johnson, and but it could easily be Hakeem Jeffries in 2026. Now, having said that, the other big difference though is that it's not a two-party system. There are,
Right.
in fact, many parties. The Liberals, the and Conservatives are the two big parties, but there's also the NDP, which is a social democratic party, the New Democratic Party. There's the Bloc Québécois, which only runs in Quebec, but is a sovereigntist party, but is also center left. And there's a Green Party, which had two seats and now has one. And there's a right-wing party, the People's Party. Now, what happened in this election, one of the big things that happened was that both on the left and the right, the votes consolidated. Both the
Mm.
Liberals and the Conservatives got more votes than they did last time because people who normally would vote for the third parties went to the main ones. So you had like a more polarized electorate.
In a way, like a real lesson to Democrats, right? Because in the 2024 cycle, we saw that the Green Party or just staying home or RFK Jr. siphoned off some amount of votes,
Yeah.
right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think the analogy would be that, like, in American politics, when the Democrats can consolidate the left of center vote, they win. And
Yeah.
when you have people who either vote third party or don't vote at all, Democrats would are in a bad position and often lose.
Mhm.
So I think Trump can be credited with consolidating the liberal vote. Now, prior to like Trump's intervention, for the last 2 years, the Conservative Party has been leading in the polls. The Liberals had a minority government supported by the NDP. This actually meant a lot of very good things because the NDP is more social democratic, so the Liberals push through things like extending dental care. So
Mhm.
now our healthcare system has a dental care component. But like a lot of governments, the Liberals were suffering from, post-COVID inflation, cost of
Headwinds.
living, a
Yeah.
housing crisis, and there's a real desire for change. And the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre had a really compelling, populist, right-wing populist message, which is
Mhm.
Canada is broken. They had a massive lead in the polls of like 20-point lead over the Liberals, which basically would have meant that the Conservatives could have formed a majority government. And I have to say, like, even though I don't like the Conservative Party politically, I think that is a compelling message in this time. This, like it's a change election. We want to do things. And the Liberals were responding by saying, Canada has never been broken, which to my mind reminded me of Hillary Clinton saying,
Right.
America has always
Yeah.
been great. Like it's not
Yeah.
a good response to people wanting change. But in any
Yeah.
case, And Trudeau was unpopular. But then Trump came along and started saying like Governor Trudeau, and we want Canada to be the 51st state, and you'll be a cherished state. And so the election didn't become about, do we want to change? Is Canada broken? It's like, should Canada survive? And for the Liberals were much stronger on this issue. They replaced Trudeau with Mark Carney, who had been a very centrist figure who had been in the Bank of
Yeah.
Canada. But even despite his centrism, I mean, I know a lot of people who are in the NDP, and I think the polls bear this out, went to the Liberals because they realized that now the main issue is, Canada surviving, and the Liberals put forward a very strong nationalist message, which is that Canada is a sovereign state and we will stand up for it. And this, allowed the Liberals to get out of their polling disaster. And they ended up getting like, I think roughly 44% of the vote. Now, right now, the Liberals are a little bit short of forming a majority. They are at 168 roughly, and they need 172 to form a majority. But having said that, the votes are still being counted, and the Liberals are picking up speed because they were very strong in the early voting. All their
Right.
voters went in very early to the election, and those are the last votes counted. And so there's a real chance that the Liberals could form a majority. It'll be a slim one. But if they don't form a majority, what will happen is that there's still like the NDP went down from 25 seats to 7, but they have enough seats that they can work with the Liberals. And we'll see a return to what we had before, which is a Liberal minority government with NDP support.
So I want to talk about Carney for another minute because I think that's a really important point. Trudeau had become pretty unpopular.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that he had been earlier very popular, he was quite handsome. He was, which is for a politician
No, no, no. I
sometimes
mean, Trudeau was a very effective
play.
campaigner, and he got
Yeah,
the Liberals one of the strongest majorities that they've ever had. And Carney is not an effective campaigner. I
right.
mean, yes.
But right, he's not, but he is, however, the man that got Britain through Brexit
Hmm.
and is a very good negotiator and good at negotiating trade and good at negotiating
Hmm.
prickly financial situations,
Yeah.
which Canada is finds itself in being the neighbors who live over the crack house
Yeah.
and who are the trading partners with America. Right now, there's a percentage of Canadians, maybe 20-30%, who are boycotting American goods
Yeah.
just right. And you have a lot of Canadian goods that America what used to be a pretty good trading partner. So I'm really curious what happened behind the scenes that got Carney into this position because it sounds like there was a fair amount of real politics going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the Liberal Party. First of all, it's a very successful political party overall. In the 20th century, the Liberals governed for 70 out of 100 years, right? So they're kind of like the natural governing party. And part of their success is that they pay a lot of attention to leadership and
Mm.
have actually. I mean, one interesting thing is they always switch from English to French because it's a binational country. So actually, like regularly for the last 100 years. First, you have a French leader, Trudeau. Then you bring in an English person,
Oh,
Carney.
interesting.
And Carney was, sort of cultivated. He had this background in he was a central banker, governor of both, first the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. I think once they decided Trudeau had to go, they thought like bringing in someone who's like hadn't been in politics before, has this broad mainstream acceptance. As you said, knows how finances, knows how to deal with crisis. That seems like a pretty compelling figure, and I think that they were right. I mean, he has negatives. Because he's not a politician, he's actually, I think,
Right.
much less charismatic than
Trudeau.
Trudeau, or even, I have to say, Poilievre, who's not my cup of tea, but has been very effective on the campaign trail. But having said that, I mean, like Carney, I think switching out was a smart move,
Very.
and because in Canada we hold our things very quickly. They were able to hold a leadership convention very quickly. So like I would imagine like if Biden had stepped down much earlier and they had gone through a proper convention, like you could have had either
Or
Harris
share or
or
someone.
someone, or you would have had someone with the legitimacy. I mean, I think that's very, very important that they didn't just put this guy in. They actually had a leadership convention.
And they picked
And so
him.
so yeah, I mean he I mean, I think the liberals did a lot of very kind of smart moves, and I think the sort of nationalist pitches that they put, and actually the genuine fear that people on the Canadian left had, Poilievre, who did kind of make sort of Trumpy noises about fake news and going after the media and other things. I think that scared a lot of people on the left, and that contributed to consolidating the vote. So the liberals, like, I mean, I think they went from being 20 points down to being ahead because they picked up a lot of mainly NDP votes, but also a lot of Black Quebecois votes, Green Party votes.
So Jesse has a question, which is there's a report that Carney said to Trump that Canada will sell its US bonds if Trump doesn't knock off the 51st state stuff. Do you think that's real? Do you think that's true? What do you think of that?
I don't know how. I mean, it's difficult to get like know this. I think that I mean, there's another story which is sort of circumstantial evidence for, which is when Carney first came in. He went to the Europe and he met with the European leaders, and I believe the Japanese Prime Minister was either went there or was on the call. And Carney's a guy with a banking background, and they did. Reportedly, they talked about bonds, and when Trump did Liberation Day and the tariffs, one of the big things that happened was that not just the stock market went down, but people started taking money off the bonds. Now, the
Right.
American Treasury bonds are held, not just by private individuals, but by governments. The Canadian government, European governments, Japan have a lot of Treasury bonds. And we do know for a fact, it is actually an absolute fact, that the people who were selling Treasury bonds after Liberation Day was not, as some people suspected, the
Right.
Chinese, who do basically kept on holding on to them, but actually Japan, the Europeans, and Canada.
Right. Just something.
So whether there was like a coordinated effort or not, I can't verify that.
And you'll remember that the bond market was the thing that finally got Trump to realize that he was
Yeah.
running a losing game. Now,
Yeah,
that
because
said,
I mean, the
there's
bond market is very like people need to understand this. If you sell off bonds, then to make up for that, interest rates will go up, and also the amount of money that the U.S. Treasury has to pay out in debt goes up, like by substantial amounts. So this is
yeah.
really like the kind of leverage point that could undo the American economy
Oh, no question.
and arguably the world economy. I mean, this is
Yeah.
serious stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like a real thing. Now, I'm wondering if you can explain to us a little bit about there's still votes coming in. They are counted in a way that the early votes are counted last.
Mhm.
So the question is, if you get what number of seats do you have to get to in order for the Liberals to win?
172.
Okay. And I'm curious, like, when you look at these two candidates, what was Carney's idea? Does he have plans for tariffs? I mean, I feel like he's a
Yeah.
very smart guy. And if you were he's like the person you would want to negotiate your tariffs issue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that there's a couple of things that are in play. One is, the Canada and the U.S. have a trade agreement, and it's actually a trade agreement that Trump
Right.
nominally negotiated. I mean, when he came in, he tore up NAFTA. Then we have the U.S., Canada, and Mexico
NAFTA
agreement.
2.0.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is, NAFTA with some changes. Now that's coming up again, and I think that the way that Carney could go forward, and I think the Mexican government is on board on this, is to say like, well, let's renegotiate, let's do tariffs under this ambit and renegotiate it. I think one thing is that this gives Trump an exit ramp because I think Trump has gotten himself into something that he did not fully understand was going to happen, and all the trouble that he's having to deal with now with the stock market and everything else. And I think that this gives, like a way in which he can kind of save face, just do like rename it, like this is the Trump agreement. And
Right.
like
Right. Right.
and just
Right.
they make whatever nominal changes. I mean, I think that like the auto workers have a legitimate belief that they want wage guarantees for Mexican workers because the wages of Mexican workers has actually gone down under free trade and is now like they're making $3 an hour at auto plants, and I think one could legitimately say to raise that. Yeah, so I think that is the way out of this. But I have to say Trump continues to talk about Canada has to be the 51st state, and I don't know how that's gonna go. Except that I think that, with the election out of the way, I think everyone across the political spectrum in Canada will have an incentive to unite. And it's very noticeable that, some of the leading conservatives on a provincial level, the Premier of Ontario, are very on board with working with Carney.
From what I understand, what really killed the Conservative Party, your Republican Party, was that they had people who supported Trump, so they couldn't
Yeah,
distance themselves from him. So that's almost a little bit of what we could see in the midterms, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I know, absolutely. I think that that was like a kind of a major problem. I mean, I think the 2 problems was that their main issues were kind of taken off the table. I mean, there's still real issues, but also there were people inside their party that admired Trump. There are people inside their party that are very close to JD Vance,
Right.
and I think that that gives the liberals some sort of like advantage. So I mean, I do think that like as Trump's tariffs and other things happen, there's a kind of backlash to him, of which this election is one example. But I think what is already seen in the United States in the special elections that have already happened, including the judgeship in Wisconsin. Yeah, I think that the Democrats are in a pretty good position in terms of the midterm.
Do you think Trump threatening to make Canada a 51st state, do you think there's any logic? Again, I don't wanna prescribe logic, my
Yeah,
dogs
yeah, yeah.
don't
No,
either,
I mean, yeah,
where
we've had
there
this talk
isn't,
before.
but
Like, we don't want to be saying
right,
a
we
lot of
don't
things
wanna
now.
say my man is playing three-dimensional chess because he never is, but what do you
Yeah.
think what do you think the thinking here is?
Well, the thinking, or maybe we can best describe it as unthinking, is that Trump does not understand how trade works, or he thinks of trade literally in the way people in the 18th century thought of trade. It's mercantilism, right? And in the 18th century, the various kingships that existed did not believe in free trade. In fact, that's why, in terms of American history, like they had the Stamp Act and weren't allowing Americans to buy Dutch tea. The idea was that you would keep the wealth within the country or within the empire, not trade with others, because that means you'd be losing money. And the only way you could expand was through imperialism by conquering other countries. And so the British and the French and the Dutch all did this. They just like expanded and had wars and fought. And then, people came along and said like, like this is kind of stupid. Like if we were just trading with each other, we don't have to conquer each other, right? And in the American Revolution, it was really fought on this free trade issue where the Americans thought like, well, it's stupid that we can't trade with the Dutch. We want to buy
Right.
Dutch tea, right? Like we don't want to be forced to buy the English tea. Now the Trump thinks in this 18th century way. He thinks that if the United States is buying products from Canada, buying timber, America is giving money to Canada, and money is leaving the country, right? And this is like Trump's, on a very primordial level, this is the way he does all his own business deals and why he was a bad businessman because he could not understand the idea of like reciprocity and, you're exchanging one thing for another for mutual benefit. And he thought like someone is trying to screw someone in a trade. So he thinks like if Canada and the US are trading, the US is losing something. Whereas if Canada and the US are one, then America is bigger. And on a more even primitive level, like I think he thinks like a child, and he's like thinking like, okay, if there's the US and Canada and Greenland, like we'll be the biggest thing on the map, right? We'll
Yeah.
be bigger than everyone else. So I honestly think that the thinking here is this kind of primitive child thinking, and it's also this kind of older economic way of thinking. And so it's why he praises McKinley all the time, right? Like it is that sort of 19th century imperialism, which one had hoped that humanity had outgrown.
Thank you, Jeet here. Thank
Uh,
you.
always great to